What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. And guess what? It is me, your guy, the Young Brother of Soul. Yeah, we are still in the NBA playoffs. Of course, you already know my hometown team, the Philadelphia 76ers, are in the NBA playoff. Well, it's only one game, though, but we did beat the Boston Celtics in a Game 7 for the first time in over 40 years, as we are playing the New York Knicks right now. But like I said, there's only one game, but like I said, we'll talk about that another time. But yeah, we definitely did indeed beat the Boston Celtics in a playoff game in a very, very, very long time. And it was a Game 7. So I could just say that hopefully, we do what we got to do. But like I said, I'm going to just leave it at that right now. So, yeah. Anyway, I would like to also give a shout out to my hometown hockey team, that they are in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. They did beat the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round, but they're playing the Carolina Hurricanes in the second round. So we probably talk about them another time too. But yeah, I'm just proud of the fact that my hometown basketball and hockey, the Flyers and the Sixers, are in the playoffs. But yeah, I'm gonna just leave it at that. So on today's episode of the Young Brother of Soul podcast show, what I'm going to be talking about is the greatest NBA players that never won an NBA championship. Now, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, there are quite a few NBA players that are in the Hall of Fame, but they don't have a ring to go with that Hall of Fame. Well, as you used to say, resume. But yeah, it's a lot of players in the NBA that were all-stars. They were defensive players of the years, offensive players, rookie of the years. Oh man, some of them at least made it to the Olympic Games of basketball. And then of course, you do have some players that careers were cut short because of brutal injuries. And we do have some players that have made it to the NBA Finals, but for some reason, they did not get that ring that they worked hard for. Did not get that ring. Now, starting on the list of one of the greatest basketball players to never win a championship, and that player is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Yao Ming. Now, before I go on with Yao Ming, I just want y'all to know that Yao Ming definitely deserved to win a championship. He won a championship, or maybe one or two, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Leave a comment. In the China Basketball League before getting drafted in the NBA. We already know he was a wonderful player for the Houston Rockets. And not only that, he was 7'6". So he definitely gave some players like Shaq problems playing in the game. But the thing about Yao Ming is he was also an 8-time NBA All-Star player. Yeah, he definitely was a 8-time NBA All-Star player, but he is also one of the great players to never play in the NBA Finals. And not only that, ladies and gentlemen, Yao Ming's career was cut short due to injuries, maybe because of his height or his weight, but all I know is Yao Ming was a phenomenal center in the NBA, 7'6". It's a shame that he didn't win the championship, but he is in the Hall of Fame. So that right there is a wonderful, tremendous thing about the career of Yao Ming. Another great NBA player to never win the championship, and this player was a phenomenal power forward. And this basketball player is, ladies and gentlemen, Amari Stoudemire. Now, Amari Stoudemire definitely was a phenomenal power forward for the Phoenix Suns and the New York Knicks. Not only that, he was also a 6-time All-Star. 6-time. He's not in the Hall of Fame yet, but he was also on an Olympic team. Yeah, that's crazy. Amari Stoudemire is not in the Hall of Fame yet. Wow. But he did appear in a Western Conference Finals, which his team did lose. But Amari Stoudemire was, he did his thing when he was playing for the New York Knicks and the Phoenix Suns. He just was phenomenal. He also would team up with the great Steve Nash and the great Carmelo Anthony, or two players that we're going to talk about later. So I'm going to just leave it at that. But yes, Amari Stoudemire definitely was a phenomenal basketball player to never win an NBA championship. Another great basketball player to never win a championship, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Derrick Rose. Now, before I go on with Derrick Rose, I just want to say that Derrick Rose was a phenomenal basketball player for the Chicago Bulls. And not only that he was phenomenal, I believe he definitely would have won a championship. Well, back in 2012, in the playoff game against the Philadelphia 76ers, Derrick Rose would succumb to an injury as he would tore his ACL. If you think about it, athletes that tear their ACL, some come back strong, some have career-ending injuries, and then some are not the same. Well, one thing I could say about Derrick Rose, he did get his number 1 jersey number retired by the Chicago Bulls. But I believe if he would have never got hurt during that 2012 basketball playoff game, they probably would have won a championship that year. But one of the greatest ones to never win a championship, and that's Derrick Rose. Another great NBA player to never win a championship, ladies and gentlemen, and that player is Carmelo Anthony. Now, Carmelo Anthony definitely was a phenomenal basketball player during his time in the league. He is a 10-time NBA All-Star, and not only that, he was part of that 2003 NBA draft class, which is still talked about to this day. And he will also win an NCAA championship with his college team with the University of Syracuse. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. He won a college championship with Syracuse, but Carmelo Anthony definitely was a phenomenal basketball player for the Denver Nuggets and the New York Knicks during his prime. Well, during his time in the league, ladies and gentlemen, Carmelo Anthony did not make it to the NBA Finals in his career. Can you imagine if he would have made it to the NBA Finals? Oh, he definitely would have won a couple of championships, but for some reason, he couldn't make it to the NBA Finals. But one thing I could say about Carmelo Anthony is, he's in the Hall of Fame. So we're just going to leave it at that. Hall of Fame player. Another great NBA basketball player to never win an NBA championship. And this team, player, as I should say, is Penny Hardaway. Now, Penny Hardaway definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. He was a 4-time NBA All-Star, and he was part of the 1996 Olympic basketball team. And he definitely was part of the 1995 Orlando Magic that made it to the NBA Finals. Well, that team, ladies and gentlemen, did get swept by the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets definitely were a better team than the Orlando Magic. They had Hakeem Olajuwon. What can you do against Hakeem Olajuwon? Well, one thing I could say about Penny Hardaway, he definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. But he just didn't win that ring. Can you imagine if he would have won that championship, ladies and gentlemen? Well, then again, he definitely was going to win that championship against the Houston Rockets. So, moving on, another great NBA player to never win a championship, and that player is, ladies and gentlemen, Tim Hardaway. Now, Tim Hardaway definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. He was a 5-time NBA All-Star. He was also part of that Olympic team of the year 2000, Sydney. Well, Sydney's in Australia. And no, he didn't win the championship. But one thing about Tim Hardaway is that he is definitely in the NBA Hall of Fame. Definitely was a great basketball player for the Golden State Warriors. Definitely. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Grant Hill. Now, Grant Hill definitely was a phenomenal basketball player in the league. He definitely was a 7-time All-Star, but he was a 2-time NCAA champion in college. But he also would suffer some injuries during his career. I mean, can you imagine if he would have stayed with the Detroit Pistons? He definitely would have won the 2004 NBA championship with that team, but he was on a different team. But one thing I can say about Grant Hill is he is in the Hall of Fame. Shout out to Grant Hill. Grant Hill definitely, to me, he's underrated. Yeah. To me, he was underrated. My personal opinion. Well, I mean, yeah, he's a 7-time All-Star, but I don't know. For some reason, my personal opinion, like I said, I think Grant Hill was very underrated. Moving on, another great NBA player to never win a championship, and this guy is, ladies and gentlemen, the late great Pistol Pete Mavericks. We all know him as Pistol Pete. Pistol Pete definitely was a 5-time All-Star. He had his jersey number retired by the Jazz and the Hawks. And he's definitely in the Hall of Fame. But for some reason, he was a great player to never win a championship. I mean, the way how he passed that ball, just, but he would miss out on the 1981 Boston Celtics that won a championship. If he would have stayed one more year, he definitely would have been an NBA champion, but he retired the year before that. So can you imagine if he would have never retired? He definitely would have had an NBA ring, but he retired too soon. But yeah, and not only that, not just too soon, he retired because of injuries too. But Pistol Pete definitely was a phenomenal basketball player to never win an NBA championship. Another great team, well, as I should say, great player to never win a championship, and that guy is Bernard King. You know, for some reason, I always thought Bernard King won a championship, but he didn't. Not only that, Bernard King was a 4-time All-Star player, and he was a phenomenal player for the New York Knicks. That teams that he played on, the New York Knicks, never appeared in the NBA Finals. But one thing I can say about Bernard King, he is definitely in the Hall of Fame. Bernard King was phenomenal. He definitely should have won a championship as good as he was. But like I said, he's in the Hall of Fame. So, yeah. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, that is, ladies and gentlemen, Artis Gilmore. Now, Artis Gilmore actually played in the ABA. And not only that, he is a 5-time ABA All-Star, 6-time NBA All-Star, but he is an ABA championship. He did win an ABA Finals, but never won an NBA Finals. Well, he was definitely part of that great Chicago Bulls team that was in the 1970s. Well, they didn't make it to the finals then until the guy by the name of Michael Jordan. But anyway, Artis Gilmore definitely is a phenomenal basketball player to never win a championship, but he did make it. Well, he won an ABA, but he didn't win an NBA. But he did make it to the Hall of Fame, so shout out to him for that, for making it to the Hall of Fame. Another great NBA player to never win a championship, and this guy is, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Webber. Chris Webber was definitely a great NBA player to never won an NBA championship. This guy definitely was a 5-time NBA All-Star. He had his jersey number retired by the Sacramento Kings. And not only that, he was part of that 2002 Sacramento Kings that were better than the LA Lakers. Well, we already know what happened in Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals due to controversial calls going for, well, against the Kings and going for the Lakers. Well, I'm just going to leave it at that. But one thing I can say about Chris Webber is that he is definitely in the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame player. Definitely. Chris Webber definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. Another great NBA player to never won an NBA championship, and that is Alex English. Now, Alex English definitely was an 8-time NBA All-Star. He was an NBA scoring champion too, and he does have his jersey number 2 retired from the Denver Nuggets, who, well, didn't make it to the finals as a player, but he is in the Hall of Fame. So shout out to him for that. Another great NBA champion. Well, sorry, NBA player to never won a championship. And that player is Nate Thurmond. Now, Nate Thurmond was a 7-time NBA All-Star. He has his jersey number 42 retired. But if he would have stayed with the Golden State Warriors within a couple of years, he definitely would have been part of that 1975 Golden State Warriors who won the NBA Finals that year. But one thing I can say about this guy, he definitely is in the Hall of Fame. So shout out to him for that. But yeah, if he would have stayed a couple more years with the Warriors, he definitely would have won that championship. I know some athletes look at it like, dang, I left the team, they won the championship, or if I would have went with this team, I would have won the championship. Yeah, it happens. It happens everywhere. Another great player to never win a championship, and that player is Lenny Wilkens. Now, Lenny Wilkens definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. He was a 9-time NBA All-Star. He has his jersey number 19 retired by the Seattle Supersonics. But later on, after he retired as a player, he would become the head coach of the 1979 Seattle Supersonics that won the NBA championship. Now, one thing I can say about this guy is that he is in the Hall of Fame as a player and as a head coach. And he was also a 4-time NBA, All-Star head coach. And he was the head coach of the 1996 Olympic basketball team. So shout out to him for that. And not only that, he won the championship as a coach. So we're just going to give him to that. Another great NBA player to never won an NBA championship, and that player is George Gervin. Now, George Gervin was a phenomenal basketball player, and not only that, he did start it in the ABA, but he also was a 3-time ABA All-Star, 9-time NBA All-Star. He's a 4-time scoring champion. And he is in the Hall of Fame. But he was also part of the San Antonio Spurs that was in the ABA. Then they moved to the NBA. Wow. San Antonio Spurs. Phew. Not the San Antonio Spurs that we know, but yeah, he definitely was part of that ABA and NBA San Antonio Spurs to never win a championship. But one thing's for sure, like I said, he's in the Hall of Fame. So shout out to George Gervin. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Adrian Dantley. Now, Adrian Dantley definitely was a 6-time NBA All-Star, but he missed 2 teams that won championships. If he would have stayed with the Lakers within a couple years, even though he went to another team, he probably would have won the 1980 NBA Finals. And if he would have stayed with the Detroit Pistons, even though he went to another team, he definitely would have won the 1989 NBA Finals. Well, one thing I can say about him is that he was a 2-time scoring champion. He has his jersey number 4 retired, but he is also in the Hall of Fame. So shout out to him for that. So, moving on the list. Well, before I move on with the list, leave a comment if you feel as though I'm leaving out more players. If not, well, it's up to you. But like I said, leave a comment if you feel as though I'm leaving out more great players to never win an NBA championship. But moving on to the list, another great NBA basketball player to never win an NBA championship, and that player is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Karl Malone. Now, Karl Malone definitely was a great NBA player to never win a championship. Well, before we go on with this, he was a 14-time NBA All-Star, and not only that, he was a 2-time MVP for the regular season. He has his jersey number 32 retired by the Utah Jazz. Well, all I can say is this. Karl Malone made it to 3 NBA championships, 1997, 1998, and 2004. We already know what happened in 1997 and 1998, as he would lose to Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and the Chicago Bulls. Yeah, the Utah Jazz definitely was not going to beat the Bulls during that dynasty. We already knew that. And he will also lose the NBA Finals of the year 2004 with the LA Lakers. They lost to the Pistons. I mean, that 2004 Lakers, they thought that they had an all-star team. I mean, they had Kobe Bryant, Shaq, Gary Payton, and Karl Malone. Yeah, they lost 4 games. Well, in 5 games. So, yeah. But one thing's for sure, Karl Malone definitely is in the Hall of Fame. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, and that player is, ladies and gentlemen, John Stockton. Now, John Stockton definitely was a phenomenal point guard for the Utah Jazz, which he spent his entire career, 19 years, in the NBA with the Utah Jazz. Well, John Stockton definitely was a 10-time All-Star. He has his jersey number 12 retired by the Utah Jazz. And not only that, he was a 3-time Olympic gold medalist, but he was also part of that 1997 and 1998 Utah Jazz that lost the NBA Finals to the Chicago Bulls. So, yeah, definitely was a great player to never win a championship. If he probably would have went to another team, he probably would have won the championship. But, some players stick with that one team, which is nothing wrong with that. But one thing I can say about John Stockton is that he is in the Hall of Fame. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, and that player is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Dominique Wilkins. Now, Dominique Wilkins was a phenomenal basketball player. He was a 9-time NBA All-Star. He was a 2-time NBA slam dunk champion. I mean, this guy just used to dunk the ball. Dunk, 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 dunk. He was a great slam dunk NBA player. He's only 2 times NBA slam dunk champion. You would think he would win more, but he did go against his teammate Spud Webb, who was 5'7", and he did go against Michael Jordan. So, yeah, but Dominique Wilkins definitely was a phenomenal NBA player to never win an NBA championship. But he also has his jersey number 21 retired from the Atlanta Hawks. But another great thing you could say about Dominique Wilkins is that he is in the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, And that player is, ladies and gentlemen, Walt Bellamy. Walt Bellamy was a 4-time NBA All-Star, and he was also NBA Rookie of the Year. If he would have stayed with the New York Knicks, he definitely would have been part of that 1970 NBA championship team of the New York Knicks. But one thing I can say about him is that he is definitely in the Hall of Fame. Definitely in the Hall of Fame. But he was also part of the 1960 Olympic gold team. So, yeah. But like I said, if he would have stayed with the Knicks within a couple more years, he definitely would have been part of that 1970 NBA championship New York Knicks. The Knicks. I'm going to just leave it at that. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship. And that player is Tracy McGrady, who was a 7-time NBA All-Star. He was part of the 2003 Olympic gold team in San Juan. Yeah, San Juan, Puerto Rico. But he did play on some great teams with the Raptors, the Magic, and the Rockets. I mean, whew, Tracy McGrady definitely is in the Hall of Fame. But he definitely was a great NBA player to never won an NBA championship. Can you imagine if he would have won an NBA championship? Lord have mercy. It would have been phenomenal. But he didn't. But he still was a great NBA player. But he still made it to the Hall of Fame. So I'm going to give him that. Another great NBA player to never win a championship. And this player is Vince Carter. Lord have mercy. Vince Carter was phenomenal during his days in the NBA. Vince Carter was an NBA 8-time All-Star player. He won the Slam Dunk in the year 2000. And not only that, he definitely has his jersey number retired by the Raptors and the Nets. Well, he did play with the Toronto Raptors. I mean, he was phenomenal dunking then, and then he would go on and play with the New Jersey Nets, not the Brooklyn Nets, the New Jersey Nets. Well, he's definitely one of the greatest players to never play in the NBA Finals. I mean, the way how he used to dunk the ball, you would think he would win a championship, but he didn't. But one thing I can say about him is that he is in the Hall of Fame, well deserved, for the great Vince Carter. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship, ladies and gentlemen, and this guy is Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller definitely was a phenomenal basketball player. He was a 5-time All-Star. He has his jersey number 31 retired by the Indiana Pacers, who he played for 18 or 19 years, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. But one thing's for sure, he did make it to the 2000 NBA Finals, which they lost to the LA Lakers, of course. Boy, like I said, it's either always the Lakers or the Celtics in the NBA Finals, but I'm going to just leave it at that. He did make an NBA Finals appearance, but like I said, he lost. But one thing's for sure about Reggie Miller definitely did make quite a few trips to the Eastern Conference Finals. But one thing's for sure, Reggie Miller is in the Hall of Fame. Shout out to Reggie Miller that's in the Hall of Fame. And moving on the list is another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship. And that player is the great Patrick Ewing, who was a phenomenal center for the New York Knicks during his time playing with the New York Knicks. Now, Patrick Ewing was an 11-time NBA All-Star. He has his jersey number 33 retired by the New York Knicks. And not only that, he actually made it to 2 NBA Finals. Yeah, we already know what happened in 1994. It was they would lose Game 7 to the Houston Rockets. And, of course, 1999 as they would lose to the San Antonio Spurs. Come to think of it, I don't even think Patrick Ewing played in that finals. I think he was injured. Correct me if I'm wrong. Leave a comment. But he would make it to the Hall of Fame, which is well-deserved. But Patrick Ewing was a phenomenal basketball player, center, that definitely should have won an NBA championship. Yeah, Patrick Ewing. Amazing. Another great NBA player to never win an NBA championship. And that player is, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Nash. Now, Steve Nash definitely was a phenomenal basketball player to never win a champ. He never even appeared in the NBA Finals. But one thing I can say about Steve Nash is that he was an 8-time NBA All-Star, and he did win the MVP of the regular season twice. He did. He made it to the Western Conference Finals at least once or twice. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know he made it against the San Antonio Spurs, which they lost. But Steve Nash definitely deserved to win a championship. He was phenomenal, but for some reason, couldn't win it all. But one thing I can say about Steve Nash is that he's in the NBA Hall of Fame. So shout out to him for that. Another great NBA player to never win a championship. My man's Allen Iverson, who definitely was a phenomenal point guard for the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, he was an 11-time NBA All-Star. He won the MVP in the year 2001. And that same year, ladies and gentlemen, Allen Iverson took the 76ers to the NBA Finals, which they lost to the Lakers. Man, Allen Iverson definitely deserved a ring. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Sixers fan, but he was a player that definitely deserved a ring. He would go on and play with quite a few other teams, like the Nuggets, the Pistons, and the Grizzlies, and then he came back to the Sixers. But yeah, he wasn't the same when he came back, but Allen definitely deserved to win the championship. But one thing I can say about Allen Iverson is that he is in the Hall of Fame. Another great NBA player to never win a championship, ladies and gentlemen, and this guy is the name of Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley was an 11-time NBA All-Star. He was a 1-time MVP in the year of 1993. He has his jersey number 34 retired by the Suns and the Sixers. But the year 1993 was the year that he won the NBA MVP, regular season MVP, like I said. And that year, ladies and gentlemen, would be the same year that they would go on and play in the NBA Finals. Well, we already know what happened in that NBA Finals, as the Phoenix Suns were going to play against the Chicago Bulls, which they lost 4-2. Yeah, Charles Barkley definitely was a phenomenal basketball player to never win a championship. I mean, he was phenomenal with his rebounding, but yeah, he for some reason couldn't win it all. But one thing I can say about Charles Barkley is that he is in the Hall of Fame. He definitely should have won a ring, but didn't turn out that way. Another great NBA player to never win a championship is Dikembe Mutombo. That's in my house. Dikembe Mutombo was definitely a phenomenal center in the NBA. One thing I can say about him is that he was an NBA All-Star 8 times, and not only that, he was a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. Well, he definitely was part of that 2001 Philadelphia 76ers that made it to the NBA Finals, which they lost. And then he was also part of that 2003 NBA team, well, as I should say, the New Jersey Nets that made it to the NBA Finals, which they lost to the San Antonio Spurs. Well, one thing I can say about Dikembe Mutombo is that he has his jersey number retired by the Denver Nuggets and the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, he was phenomenal. And he is also in the Hall of Fame, too. So shout out to him for that. But Dikembe Mutombo definitely should have won an NBA championship. He was phenomenal. Especially when he blocks the ball and be like, "Not in my house." But, yeah, definitely phenomenal. Phenomenal player that should have won an NBA championship. All right, ladies and gentlemen. The last player, greatest player, well, one of the great players But y'all get what I'm saying. The last NBA player, one of the greatest to never win an NBA championship is Elgin Baylor. Now, Elgin Baylor was an 11-time NBA All-Star. He has his jersey number 22, retired by the LA Lakers. Well, one thing I can say about Elgin Baylor, he made it to the NBA Finals 8 times as a player. His record in the NBA Finals is 0-8. The reason why he's 0-8 in the NBA Finals is because him and the Lakers will always face against, well, I shouldn't just say always. Well, yeah, you might as well say, but they were going to face the dynasty of the 1960s Boston Celtics. Yeah, I mean, 8 times making it to the finals and losing it, that's a, oh boy, that's a heartbreaker. And not only that, he is in the Hall of Fame, so I give him credit for that. But 8 times, yeah, that's, like I said, that's a heartbreaker. But the year he retired, the next year, the LA Lakers won the championship in 1972. I know he probably was looking like, oh man, if I would have stayed one more year, I would have won an NBA championship with the LA Lakers. But like I said, he's in the Hall of Fame, and he's definitely the greatest NBA player to never win an NBA championship. 0-8 in the finals. Whew, Lord have mercy. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are your great NBA players to never win a championship. Like I said, they've been to the finals quite a few times, but they lost it. Some never appeared in the finals, but some of these players are NBA All-Stars. And not only that, they're NBA All-Stars, everybody except one, though. I'm waiting on him, though. But everybody on this list made it to the NBA Hall of Fame. Like I said, there are quite a few athletes in the world that don't have a championship, but they made it to the Hall of Fame. So I give them that. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, those are your great NBA players to never win a championship. But make sure you tell all your family and friends to subscribe, hit that thumbs up, leave a comment, hit that notification button, and make sure y'all tune in for some new episodes of the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. And like I said, make sure y'all tune in for some new episodes, because there will be some new episodes coming on the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. Thank you. And y'all have a good one. And one more thing I should say. I just hope my hometown basketball team, Philadelphia 76ers, but like I said, just leave it at that. But thank y'all for watching, and like I said, make sure y'all tune in for some new episodes of the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. Thank you.